Hi, everyone. Welcome to Amplifying Staff Wellbeing in the Workplace. This webinar is going to be presented by Madge Haynes and myself. And we are both with the Full Frame Initiative, which we'll tell you a little bit about in a minute. And we're both on the engagement and partnerships team here at FFI. So as you're joining us, feel free, a few housekeeping logistics. The first is feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself. We know that people are all showing up as Sasha and we aren't sure why, but this is your chance to correct and introduce who you are, even though your Zoom name might be showing up as Sasha. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to ask questions, make a comment, or seek clarification. Madge and myself will be keeping an eye on the chat, as well as Sasha, who is working on the tech behind the scenes. Closed captioning is available, so go ahead and click on CC if you need it. If there are tech challenges and you are able to view this screen, I believe we'll also put the information into the chat. Contact Sasha at this number or this email address 413-522-4072 or Sasha at fullframeinitiative.org if you're running into any tech issues, and she will help you out. We are recording this webinar for folks who missed it, or for those of you who want to revisit some of the content or share the content with others. So the plan for today is we will start off telling you a little bit about the Full Frame Initiative. We'll spend some time going into the needs and experiences that we all need in order to have well-being. And then we'll spend some time thinking specifically about that intersection between well-being and the workplace. The last piece will be around anticipating trade-offs for staff, so some concrete tools for thinking about this intersection. And then we'll end with some question and answer time for those of you who have any questions. Feel free to drop questions into the Q&A section or into the chat, and we'll be tracking those throughout the webinar. So the Full Frame Initiative, we are a national social change organization, and part of what we do is trying to build networks and connect like-minded people to each other to spark a movement for a country where everyone has a fair shot at well-being. And as I was thinking about this webinar and preparing for this webinar, I was thinking about well-being and the workplaces, in particular, my experiences with workplaces. So I thought about those workplaces where I stayed longer than I intended. Maybe I just planned to stay a year, but then I stayed 2 years, or I just planned to stay a couple of years and then stayed for 5. So I thought about these places and thought about, well, what made me decide to stay there? What was it about these workplaces that really supported me? And as I was reflecting on this, I realized that some of them were supporting my social connectedness. So maybe I was getting a sense of belonging at work in some of them. And others of them were supporting my social connectedness outside of work. So I was able to be there for my family members when they were having health problems. I realized that these workplaces were giving me flexibility to get my needs met. So needs like basic needs like medical care, but also things like volunteer work or getting to take that course or class that I really wanted to take. I realized that these workplaces were supporting my feeling of accomplishment, my need for learning, really supporting me in all these different ways. And so as I reflected on these workplaces, I was also thinking about how they created these conditions. They created this environment that really supported my well-being and my unique need for well-being, because what I need for well-being is different than what Madge needs. But these workplaces allowed me to meet what I needed. And that's not to say that the workplace tried to do everything for me, right? It wasn't trying to meet all my needs, but it allowed me to do it. So we're going to spend some time talking about well-being and what it is that we all need in order to have it, in order to have increased access to it, and what the workplace can do to help support that.
And to start us off, we're really going to launch in now into getting your feedback and your input on how you define what we all need to weather challenges and have health and hope. What is that in your definition for what we all need to weather challenges and have health and hope? We have a Mentimeter that we're going to ask you to put your responses in so that we can see everyone's thoughts at the same time. The Mentimeter link has been added to the chat. Please click there and add your thoughts. What do we all need to weather challenges and have health and hope? Seeing some responses there. Flexibility, support, connection, compassion, balance, relationships, community, acknowledgement, value, validation, I see as well, financial stability, security. A lot of great responses here. Please keep adding them. We have a definition for well-being, which we're going to be sharing with you, and Lotus is going to describe more about what we mean when we talk about those needs that we all have universally to weather challenges and have health and hope. That's how we define well-being, as the set of needs and experiences that universally are required in combination and in balance to weather challenges and have health and hope. And a lot of the comments that you all made and shared in the Mentimeter really do align with some of those needs and how we get our needs met. Some of the things that we're actually striving for in the areas of getting our needs met for well-being. And Lotus is going to define specifically what we have offer in our framework for looking at well-being and describing those needs that we're all striving for in order to have well-being, in order to have health and hope. And so she's going to go through that, and then we are going to continue with our discussions. So thank you for participating in that and for offering your comments.
Thank you for those thoughts. A lot of that, I think, as Madge mentioned, overlaps with some of what is in the way that we at the Full Frame Initiative think about well-being, and certainly ties into what is needed for health and hope. So our definition is here, like Madge said, a set of needs and experiences universally required in combination and balance to weather challenges and have health and hope. And what this means is that we all have a set of needs and experiences that we need in social connectedness, stability, safety, mastery, and meaningful access to relevant resources. These are what we call the 5 domains of well-being. And Madge and myself, we're not HR experts. We're not experts on workplaces. And at the Full Frame Initiative, we don't always do it right, and we don't always do it perfectly. But what we're offering here at this webinar is a framework for understanding people and what drives all of us as human beings. It's what's hardwired inside us from just us growing in our brains from development all through evolution. It's what explains some of our behaviors, explains some of our choices. We're constantly trying to meet our needs in these 5 areas and balancing the trade-offs between them when we have to make decisions. So this is not limited to the workplace, but understanding how our brains are set up in this way and understanding what really makes all of us tick, that can tell us a lot about what our experience of the workplace is and how workplaces can help support our well-being or get in the way of it. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about each of these domains and thinking about them for ourselves, and then going into using some tools. So we all need social connectedness. So we all need relationships, and we all need a sense of belonging. So this is individual relationships. So relationships where we have a way of getting or receiving support of any kind, emotional or tangible. But also we need opportunities to feel like we're part of a group, to feel like we have a sense of belonging. And it's not where we necessarily know everybody in that group, but places where we feel like there's a connection, like a church community or a book club, or maybe even fans of the same sports team or fans of the same celebrity, where you can see somebody else who's clearly been labeled as part of that group, either with a hat or a shirt, and then all of a sudden there's some sort of connection. We need places where we feel a sense of belonging. And the workplace can provide some of that. Like, as I was reflecting on my experience of the workplaces, there were some where I felt a sense of belonging at work, but it also doesn't have to. I think the questions to really think about is, how is the workplace making it more possible for me to get these needs met inside and outside of work? So are there things that the workplace is doing? I was also reflecting, as I mentioned before, that in some cases, it was having the flexibility so I could take care of family members when I needed to. So how does the workplace support that? And then how does the workplace get in the way of me being able to maintain my social connectedness outside of work as well? Being able to show up for my children's plays, show up for my parents when they need help getting to the doctor, things like that. So thinking about it through that lens. We all also need a sense of stability. So we need to feel predictability. That's the ability to keep some level of routines. A lot of times that's what lends some predictability to our lives. Morning routines, evening routines, which can be different for different people. Just some way of knowing generally what's happening from one day to the next. And we need a sense of familiarity. So we're not always on alert, not always waiting for the other shoe to drop or waiting to see what happens. Just enough predictability and familiarity to concentrate on the here and now and on the future. I think about this as breathing room. So having a little bit of space to breathe, feeling like the ground is generally steady underneath my feet. We also need to know that one small problem isn't going to have a domino effect to something bigger and blow up. And so the questions here to think about also are, how does the workplace do that? Is the workplace helping to create stability within the work itself? And how is the workplace affecting my stability, my predictability, my familiarity outside of work as well? How is it contributing to that feeling of having breathing room, helping me to make sure one tiny thing isn't going to become a giant issue later down the road, or domino into that sort of effect? We all need a sense of safety. And in this definition of safety, the authentic self is an important piece of that. So that's core identities. We need to be able to be, that's race, gender, sexual orientation, art, religion, all the different things that make up ourselves. And we need to be able to be those authentic selves and not be at heightened risk of physical or emotional harm. So safety, like all of the other domains, is very individual and heavily informed by our experiences and the context in which we live. That impacts whether some of us feel safe in one situation, while others may not feel safe in that same situation. And so thinking about safety, how do I feel safe in my workplace, right? And then also, how does my role in my workplace make it more or less safe outside of work? And so again, thinking about what, not necessarily that the workplace has to do all of it, but like, how does that interplay, right? We don't live in a silo of this is the work life and this is the home life. they do interact and affect each other. We all need a sense of mastery. We need to know that we can influence our fate and our decisions, and that if we try really hard and put in a lot of effort, it's going to matter. And sometimes we get these experiences through this feeling of being able to affect things and being able to do things. Sometimes we get it through what we at FFI like to call high five moments. So for example, last year, I had a leaky fridge. It was leaking water out the bottom. So I went and on Google and searched on YouTube and found some videos about how to melt the block of ice at the back of the freezer with a hair dryer. And that felt really good. It was, definitely made me feel like I wanted to high five someone. It was like, oh, I did it. And it's not like I was a fridge mechanic all of a sudden. I don't actually know if fridge mechanic is a thing, but it wasn't like I was an expert, right? You don't have to be the best in order to get that high five moment feeling. But it's those little moments, there's that rush that helps us feel like we can do things, that we can affect things, that we can make changes. And sometimes those tiny, tiny experiences can build to help us make even bigger changes in our lives. And we find ways of getting that feeling no matter what circumstances we're living in. And so, like with all the domains, this is true of social connectedness, true of stability, true of safety as well, we can find ways to meet our needs that are healthy and unhealthy. I think the thing to keep in mind with this framework is it's really thinking about it from the person's perspective, right? It's just the way in which we as individuals are experiencing the world around us and the way that we are experiencing well-being. And so it's not us trying to put that and interpret it for somebody else. So thinking about, how does the workplace do that? Do I get a sense of accomplishment from the work I'm doing here? And if not, that's okay too. How does the workplace get in my way of getting this feeling somewhere else, right? Maybe there are other things that I do that give me a sense of mastery. How does the workplace impede on that, right? It's not that we need well-being and all of it to happen within the workplace, but that we as individuals need to feel like that we're able to meet our needs in all 5 of these domains overall, which includes the workplace. We all need meaningful access to relevant resources. So we need to decide for ourselves what resources are relevant. What kind of food, what kind of clothing do I actually need? I like to think about, and in some of the work that we've done with youth, like not all clothing is created equal. There's clothing that makes sense for that are relevant and clothing that's not. My parents used to drive 30, 45 minutes to a grocery store to get food that was familiar to them, right? So which resources are relevant? And how can we get those in a way that's not difficult, not degrading, and not dangerous? And so again, thinking about, how does the workplace allow us to get our basic needs met? And how does it get in the way of that? And just to reiterate, it's not about the workplace being able to do everything. So for example, like if I'm somebody who needs medical treatment at the hospital and my workplace is an hour away, that will impact some of my decision-making and some of the trade-offs that I'm trying to weigh between the various domains, right? This isn't a framework to tell you that the workplace has to do everything. It's a framework for understanding how we all operate, for understanding people, so that we can have a very different conversation. Maybe the conversation is, okay, if you need medical treatment, let's figure out how on those days you need medical treatment that you don't have to drive an hour away. Maybe that's a time you could work from home. That's not to say that works in every situation, but it opens up a doorway to a different conversation to happen. So these 5 domains of well-being are not hierarchical. And basically what that means is that we don't get safe and then we worry about social connectedness and then we worry about stability. or in any order. We're always weighing the trade-offs between the different domains, trying to meet our needs generally overall. My mom likes to end phone calls with me saying, remember, Lotus, safety is the most important thing. And I think in reality, the way in which I live my life and the way in which many people live their lives, it doesn't always, none of the domains is number one. I mean, a few weeks ago, I went cross-country skiing, and with the way my heart rate was going, it definitely did not feel safe, right? I learned in my late 30s, so it was, there's a lot of falling involved. But it was worth it because of getting a little bit of mastery. I was getting better, not falling as much on the hills. And also I was going with friends, so social connectedness. They're non-hierarchical. Sometimes we want to do a little bit more of another thing. Sometimes we want to do more of this thing. We're weighing trade-offs. Context and history matter within these domains. So in this country, oppression and racism and sexism and all the various isms impact the way in which we're able to meet our needs in the domains. And that is different based on the groups that you're in, based on where you're at. And as I've mentioned throughout so far, there are trade-offs within the domains. They're interdependent. They don't all just work in silos. Every decision, every choice we make means that we're giving something up, even decisions that we want. And meaning matters. We're all different. And the meaning that we ascribe to something, like my going skiing or deciding to work somewhere, is different. Madge and I would probably have very different reasons for why we like the work that we do, or different reasons for skiing. Although I don't actually know if you ski or not, Madge. So we all have assets in each area of these domains. What's important is figuring out what those assets are so that we can have a conversation around how we're meeting our needs for well-being and how that can be supported or made better.
So now we're going to talk about self-care, which a lot of people think about when we talk about well-being. And how does it connect with our concept of well-being? Self-care is often something that we do in order to get our needs met. And those needs that Lotus just described, we use self-care as, okay, I'm going to really work at this so that I can pay attention to this need that I have, and I'm going to overcome all the other things that get in the way of doing that. So when we talk about self-care in the workplace and what typically happens, we're remembering that even when we make this decision to have better self-care, take better care of our bodies, better care of the way that we're eating, take better care of or getting our rest, that even when we're making decisions that are positive for us, right, that we're making positive change, it all involves trade-offs, so that we can't do everything. So we're going to have to give up something. And this is often why we don't do self-care very well. But sometimes self-care, making the decision to say, I'm going to exercise it. I'm going to do this at the beginning of the year. It's 2022, January 1, I decided, yes, I'm going to exercise more because I want to have more energy. I want to feel like I'm getting stronger. And of course, in 2021, I didn't do that so much. And so I might start off really, really well. And for the first couple of months, I'm going to the gym, getting my exercise in, taking care of all of my physical needs, feeling great about myself. But then that exercise, that getting to the gym just becomes one more thing to do. How am I going to fit this into my schedule when I just don't automatically have that ability to see where I can get exercise in? So here are some of the things that can get in the way and the way it impacts our needs for well-being for other things. So if I'm a parent and I have to get off work. By the time I get off work, I pick up kids from school and childcare. We run an errand and we get home. I cook dinner. I realize that I only have maybe 1 to 2 hours with the kids before they have to go to sleep for bedtime in terms of the school nights. And so what this means is if I take another hour out of that time to go exercise at the gym, then I'm missing out on social connectedness in terms of having time with my kids and spending time with my kids. And that's why maybe I'll drop the exercise, because it's more important to me to have time with my kids rather than go to the gym. Or maybe going to the gym takes an hour out of my day, and I'm really working on this project that I need to get done, and we're at the crunch time where that extra hour could really make a difference in me getting this done and meeting my deadline. So that might impact my mastery. And I just decide that, well, I'm going to focus on work because I really have that need more than I really have the need to go and exercise. Or it could be just I've started exercising, got so excited about it, and then I start pulling muscles and having muscle strains. And then I become concerned about, well, if I continue down this road, I might actually injure myself so that I'm not able to walk. That would affect my ability to get places, to even get to work or to take care of my children. I'm concerned for my safety in that regard. Or it's just, I have too much to do, period. I can't see a way to fix my schedule, even fit it in with 15-minute increments to do some sort of exercise in between activities. It's just too much. And if I try to focus on exercise, everything else will get out of control. Things will start to spiral. And I'm feeling like, no, I don't have the breathing room to exercise. And that's impacting my stability. So there are ways that even exercise, a good opportunity, sometimes a lot of workplaces offer the ability to have memberships at gyms. And yes, that's a nice benefit, but if people then expect themselves to go to really use that benefit and to show appreciation, then they may be missing out on some of these other things and actually may not get to the exercise, and they may feel actually pretty terrible about that. Or another way of self-care is to get away. And I might say, yeah, let's go on vacation. That looks better to me. That ocean view, the beach, I love it. I live in Arizona. We don't have an ocean, so I would rather be at the ocean looking at that blue sky and that beach right now. But sometimes even planning vacation can impact my choices in terms of what I'm weighing for trade-offs. I might feel really awful if I'm planning a vacation and I planned it a year ago, but all of a sudden we have a project that came up that wasn't intended, and I have to leave my colleagues with a load of work that they weren't anticipating. And so I may be concerned about not only my mastery and wondering about things when I get back, how the workload will be, but also concern for my relationships with them. Or my supervisor, when I mention having a vacation, may say yes, but really body language says, why are you doing this now? Or why do you need it now? And there may be some sort of irritation that I sense, even if it's not outward. Or my colleagues may have some sort of resentment for me taking some time off. And so again, that impacts social connectedness. So even when we're having self-care decisions, they can get in the way of the way we are experiencing our well-being in other domains. This is where the balance between trade-offs that we're making among the domains is important to be aware of. And as Lotus mentioned, that in workplaces, if people are trying to attempt to have self-care, then knowing some of these things that they're balancing might be opportunities for you as supervisors, you as managers, or your organization to figure out ways to support staff in having some of those self-care moments and removing or mitigating some of the trade-off experiences that they might have. This is not something that staff on their own can do in terms of creating those conditions, those environments, as Lotus said, that need to be in place so that there can be discussion around what trade-offs that they're balancing. How can we then help support the staff that we are working with and allow them to get their needs met in well-being? One of the examples that we have from our organization last year, as it relates to time off, we all were able to take the same time off. Our office was closed for a week. Our leadership decided and made that decision to give us all the same time period off. And what this did for us as employees was that we were able to take that time, not worry about what everyone else was taking on as we were out of the office, because we were all out of the office at the same time. It allowed us to really have that break together and then to come back refreshed. So that's just one example of how an organization might think about creating those environments, creating the conditions that allow for folks to be able to take care of themselves and get their well-being needs met.
I think what's also important to underscore is that there's not one right way to be supporting well-being of staff. What it is about paying attention to how those staff are meeting their needs for well-being, and then as an organization, coming up with some way to support and figure out how to support that well-being. For us, it was the closing for a week. For other organizations, that may not be possible. So what can happen instead? How can that conversation be different? And to explore. Again, this is not a prescription. This is much more of here's a framework for you to use in understanding and opening a different conversation. So we're going to give you a couple tools that are concrete that can be used with yourself, with staff, in order to spark that kind of conversation. The first is we're calling, with our creative titling, Wellbeing and the Workplace tool. So I'm going to walk us through exactly what's on this tool, and then we're going to give you a chance to reflect on this on your own, just so that you can have the experience of using the tool. And then I would invite you at the end of that to share some thoughts about what that experience is like. How is this useful? How is this, what does this open up for you? So the way that this tool is set up, and we can drop, the link is there at the top, but we can also drop the link in the chat so that you can access it there if you'd like to. As well, I believe it went out by email, so you can download it there too. And we'll send it out again after this webinar is over. So the first is to think about what are your most important and present ways of meeting your needs in these domains? Not specifically in the workplace, right? Because we don't live sort of in those boxes. We live overall, right? So for you as a person, thinking about your life as a whole, what are the most important and present ways of meeting your needs for social connectedness, safety, stability, mastery, meaningful access to relevant resources? And there's a little bit of description of what those domains are down at the bottom to just plop in there, right? What's most present? And then after spending some time getting those most important things you would really not want to ever give up on the piece of paper, then spend a moment thinking about these questions. Looking at that circle, how does your workplace support that? How does your workplace allow you to continue to meet your needs in those ways that are in the circle? And then the third step, thinking about, and how does the workplace get in the way, hinder your ability to meet those needs in those circles? And then in step 4, thinking through what can be added, removed, or changed that would allow you to get more of what you need for well-being. And I think what I really want to emphasize here is that the goal is not necessarily to have it be 100% always supportive or anything like that. What's important here is to just figure out what exactly is going on so that we can better understand what the conversation is to be had. I'd like to invite you to share in the chat what this experience was like. I guess the blessing is that everyone is logged in here as Sasha, so it is probably truly going to be anonymous. So feel free to drop in the chat what this experience was like, to thinking about the ways in which the workplace supports and hinders your ability to meet your needs for well-being, thinking about those policies, practices, structures, culture, any of those pieces. Any aha moments, anything that really stood out to you, anything that this brought to light for you. Or if it gave you an idea of how to use this, where it might be useful, anything that popped up for you. Looks like it brought some realization about where the struggles are and how whose needs are being placed before, maybe coworkers' needs are being placed before your own needs. Yeah. I think what is valuable about this tool is its ability to shed light and put to words what's going on, which can allow us to better articulate what it is that we need for well-being and allow us to have that different conversation. My suggestion is not to necessarily have people fill out the tool and then submit it, but more around having people fill out the tool for their own ability to understand and then share what makes sense for them to share, right? Because if we can't be honest with ourselves in using the tool, then it doesn't help, right? So I'm also seeing, different pluses of the process. Also how a state of flow is important. Yep. So what's important about the workplace that actually, or what's important to us that sometimes can be blocked. Mm-hmm. Yep. Seeing also about how we need to dig deep to understand how to strengthen trauma-informed response to those we serve. Yep. So lots of different ideas. I'm glad that you had a chance to try it out and see what kinds of impacts and experience it can offer. Madge is going to walk us through a second tool for you to try out, not necessarily to get today as a whole, but also for you to try out after our webinar.
That's right. And so this takes a little bit of different approach in terms of looking at our rules and policies and how their impact on well-being might be for staff and what they're experiencing. And so what this tool is it's a resource for supervisors to use this with your teams, sometimes individuals, but the way that we are sharing it today is really in the context of using this with your staff and groups to have a conversation about something that may be either a controversial or a challenging rule, or maybe even it's a change in staffing. Maybe you're blending departments or getting new types of leadership or configurations of that. So it might be different opportunities for you to just see how people are experiencing their well-being and what they're weighing in terms of the trade-offs that they might anticipate having as a result of this rule or policy that might be changes. So we will walk through this tool first and just share along the way an example that we had in our organization to bring some life to the content and the thoughts here. So you might wonder, like, why is it really important to create space? And we do, in this particular tool, advise that you intentionally provide space for staff to think about the rule or the policy that they're going to be experiencing, or that the change that's going to be affecting them. And the reason we do that is because sometimes people won't take the time to really think about what's going on, or even parse out some of those thoughts, or have anxiety and not even really realize why until they're able to sit down and really think about questions that are really prompting them to identify some of the source of anxiety that they may not even realize that they had about a certain change. It also can be an opportunity to help staff understand what works for them so that they can carry that forward in this particular change. So maybe they had a similar experience and maybe it's another organization that they worked with, that they can bring that experience and help them manage that change in that particular incident into this particular incident to help them navigate the change and how they might be able to mitigate some of their concerns or impacts. It can help supervisors then know, and as a result of the conversation, if a policy or a rule is impacting one group or one person or two people more than it does the rest of the group. And that can be on any of the identity factors, or it can be just things that you won't even necessarily consider in planning for the rule or the policy. So it gives you an opportunity to rethink, to revisit any rule or policy that might disproportionately affect individuals in your staff. And then this also is an opportunity to make sure that folks know that we do this for people who come into our programs. We also want to have parallel process as it impacts the staff that are working with the people in our programs. So how we go about doing this is we have identified a specific amount of time. First, you identify the rule or the policy. That could be controversial, that could be challenging, and you already know that. You anticipate you might get some feedback on this one, or it's just a switch, as I said before, in the way that you're going to organize your work or your teams. That might be a change that might cause some tension for folks. And we've set aside 40 minutes, not so much time that it's just like overkill and people are like, I don't even want to do this. Some time that allows them to really be reflective and time together to do that, so that people can really walk through this tool for themselves, answer the responses, but not be pressured to think about things outside of work. So it's really wonderful if the supervisor can say, hey, as a group, we're going to take this time to think about this. I want your feedback. I want your input. Let's have a discussion on how this might impact all of us. And I want to hear from everyone. Let's share that together. You want to be clear, as Lotus mentioned earlier about the other tool, that we're not asking people to provide responses to be submitted and reviewed in paper, but really this is a mechanism for helping people guide their thoughts, come up with their thoughts, and then having some discussion about what they choose to share with others as it relates to this policy or this rule. And you can remind folks, just like we've just shared with you, if you don't have a printer, just use a piece of paper. It's just as fine, just to jot down your thoughts and take some time to answer the questions. And also, as we're going through all of these tools, it's okay if there is nothing that folks can identify in the domains that's going to impact them. It's not expectation that everything have a thought or idea or an impact. In fact, folks should just know that maybe there's just one that they want to, that really concerns them. And that's something that hopefully that they will share, so that you can figure out how to support them and navigate that process with them coming to some areas where you might be able to mitigate. And then as a group, you would want to, after that discussion, after that period of reflection, have a discussion and just see what comes up, what people share and what you learn from that. And then ask these questions if they are good prompts to help people think, if they're not offering things in the beginning. And it's things for you to consider as well, that after the conversation, where are things that might have been disproportionately impacting? Is there something that we can reconsider in the rule or policy that can eliminate or even mitigate that? And making sure that folks know that you're having this conversation because they're valued, and you want to make sure that people are able to share, and that they feel by sharing that their information that they shared with the group, that with you, was actually heard and valued. Doesn't mean that all of the rules will change, but certainly it's wonderful to acknowledge and have the discussion about some of the impacts that might come as a result of a new rule or a new policy. So to walk through the tool, we look at all the domains as we identify the change that's happening. So first you just say, what is the change? And for our group, I'm going to share something that we experienced last year in our organization. I use our organization because that's where we are. And we last year decided that we were going to go fully virtual. Before, we were not fully virtual before last year. And so the decision was, what happens if we're going to go fully virtual? And all of us were asked to walk this process, to use this tool as a resource to complete individually in our own reflection, and then to have a discussion as a staff in an all staff meeting to have just share, what would those impacts look like for everyone as a result of going fully virtual. So the first area that you would really assess for yourself is, how will this change affect my social connectedness in both ways that I like and don't like? And why is it important to me? So we all took some time really looking at that. For me, I'll share my responses. It was really, I miss connecting with my peers. And even though I'm away from my peers in terms of where my location is, I could look forward to, at least in the months where I traveled or where we had all staff meetings, I could see people, I could spend time with them, not just in the office. We could go outside for lunch, and we could go out for dinner, or just laugh together getting coffee in the times when we weren't just working or in meetings. And so I missed those opportunities. And I knew that that would be a big thing for me because I'm not in that particular city where our office is located. For safety, for me, there was no concern there. I really did not think my safety would be impacted by the change in terms of going fully virtual. So that wasn't something that I needed to spend some time reflecting on. For the next domain, it was looking at stability and how my stability might have been impacted in ways that I didn't like. And for me, actually, it was going to be better for me in terms of my stability. I felt like I would be able to have a more predictable travel schedule. I would not have to just not know every week where I was going to be traveling, which could have been part of my experience before in certain weeks. So it would allow me to have more control over how I planned for travel, and then when I returned from travel in my life at home. And my mastery, for me, was a concern about technology. Going fully virtual meant more than just Zoom technology, but a lot of other pieces of technology that are more necessary when you're not in person, in communicating and keeping the workflow. So I knew for me that would be an area that I would need to continue to grow and gain some skills in, and felt like I didn't really have all of the skills that I would have needed for doing virtual work totally. And then for meaningful access to relevant resources, that's also an area which I did not feel was impacted by our going totally virtual. So it was not an issue for me or anything that I needed to be concerned about. So when the last part of this worksheet is really to look at ways that you have experiences in past that can help you with the current experience that you're reviewing or trying to assess how to navigate, how to make sure that you are addressing any trade-offs that can be addressed. So I thought about the conditions that I'd worked in before when I was a consultant and didn't have an office to go to with folks. And I remembered how I managed to get through that. And so some of that experience helped me to think about those pieces about technology, those pieces about missing my peers, how I might be able to plan for making some connections with folks differently, and learning technology and paying attention to others as they were using it so that I could glean some knowledge and some skills. And then what would make it worth it for me to make the change was really just figuring out those ways for me to connect with people just because, not just because we were working or had a meeting or an assignment, but really figuring out ways to still be able to laugh with people and to connect with them, and have some opportunity for conversation and knowing how their families were, how they were individually, without being specifically connecting over just work products. And so this was a process that we used. We had a discussion. We all shared those things that rose to the top for us that we thought would be helpful for the group to know. And did we decide to go fully virtual? Yes. Did we not make a decision to not go fully virtual? No, no one really squelched that plan. But with all of those considerations, where most of us were thinking about, yeah, how do we connect with each other, be in this environment? What are we going to miss about doing some of those things? And we've been intentional since about figuring out ways to do that. And some of us more than others in our organization are really good at making those connections, figuring out ways to bring sunshine, as we call it in our organization, to the group and have fun and present those different opportunities for connection that we don't normally have in the regular work day when we're looking at work products. So it's something that we think this tool can be beneficial, certainly in groups. You can also use it, of course, with an individual, if it's one individual making significant change and inviting them to have go through the same process for their own review and their own sake and have a conversation with them about it. But hopefully in your groups with your staff, it will lend some conversation so that you can understand where people are weighing their trade-offs, and if there are places where your organization or you as a team can make some different rules or policies or something to mitigate that rule or policy that's coming into effect, then you will know what might be helpful for your staff and get it directly from them, not just on assumptions that you're making from things that you think might work.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. So those are two concrete resources and tools for you to try out. Before we get into answering some of the questions that have popped up, we wanted to give you 3 ways to get started. One is you have these two tools now. So maybe try out one of them and or both of them, and have a conversation with your staff individually or as a group, just to see how it goes and opening that conversation. Of course, being clear about what can change and what can't change to set up those expectations as well. Another option is just listening to what staff are saying and being open to ways of addressing trade-offs. So possible scenarios are if you're thinking of moving your office, if you're thinking about going virtual, thinking about changing hours of operation, thinking of hiring a bunch of new staff or their staff turnover, just listening for the trade-offs that people are talking about. This is hardwired inside us. We're always talking about the trade-offs, even if we're not using these words. It can be helpful just to start tuning in. Okay, where is social connectedness showing up? Where is safety showing up? What are people saying about stability? And listening for those clues. A third possibility is joining a community. We invite you to join a community of people who are committed to creating structures that focus on well-being that can support some of this. The first is the Wellbeing Blueprint. This is a set of principles that are very aligned with this framework and this way of thinking. And it's a community of people who have signed on to these principles who are interested in working towards a country where everyone has a fair shot at well-being. The second possible community is, like I mentioned at the beginning, we're not experts in HR or workplaces. And what we are offering is this framework and thinking about this framework and how it applies to the workplace. And we're interested in learning. We're constantly learning and growing. And if you know of a community that is a learning community around workplace well-being, let us know. We'd love to be a part of it. And if you don't know of one, but you'd like to join one, let us know. Maybe we'll start one, just for people to share ideas and share thinking around this. So our contact information is here, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or thoughts, or just want to explore some ideas together. And now we'd like to open up in the last 11 minutes that we have to any questions that folks have. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat itself. I did notice, and I do want to answer some of the questions that were in the chat earlier, that I answered in the chat, but I feel like it'd be useful to maybe expand a little bit on what I had typed. So the first, I guess there's the question about the slides, which is concrete. The slides, the tools will all be shared afterwards, so you'll have a copy that you can share with others as well. One of the other questions here, there was a question about the tool with well-being in the workplace with the pie chart, thinking about what's important to us, how it can be adapted to home and school. Definitely feel free to adapt to those contexts, because this framework isn't just for the workplace. It's not just for staff people or employees. It really applies to all of us and is just an explanation for how we all think and are driven, what drives us. So it can be used in the workplace or in school. We do a lot of using this framework with youth. A lot of the times, one thing to keep in mind if you're working with adolescents, or if you have adolescents in your life that you'd like to introduce this to, just because of where brain development is, social connectedness and mastery are especially prominent. So something to keep in mind there.
I think also for that, Lotus, if people have specific questions, we have other tools that we have not shared today. So if you will email Lotus and I with, or I should say, with your question, if you have more texture to put to the question, so that we may be able to respond in different ways or provide you with another resource that might be really relevant for that. I'm thinking some of the workbooks that we have, Lotus.
That's true. Thank you for mentioning that, Madge. If you go to the website, there are some workbooks that are designed for children, youth, and adults for thinking through how they're meeting their needs and well-being. It walks you through the different domains, walks you through some thinking tools, also with a similar goal of trying to understand better for ourselves what's going on, and also being able to express it to other people and identify what might be getting in the way. I'm also thinking about that answer for the other question in the chat around unpacking a general morale issue. And I think both of these tools can definitely be part of that. And also, I think there are other resources that we might have that might be helpful, particularly in thinking about some of the systems change information and what it takes to shift systems, and all the different components that are involved. So get in touch, feel free to email us, and we'd be glad to share any of those resources. And those are the questions that are in the Q&A and in the chat. If you have other questions, feel free to drop them in. And if not, we would be glad to receive your questions after this webinar also. If you have been reflecting on what was said and had some thoughts and want to reach out, feel free to email us. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you will take some bit of this and try it out and let us know how it goes. We are always interested in learning together, connecting with you all, connecting you all to each other. So please do reach out to us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.